Hey everybody, welcome back to my channel. I'm Maureen, and today I'm going to be sharing with you 15 sewing tools that you need as a beginner. So if you just saw my 10 sewing tips for beginners video, this is kind of like a continuation of that same series, I guess you could call it. I realized in making that video, I was like, I should make one about sewing tools. And I had to, again, go back in my catalog of videos, and I've made videos about tools that I buy in bulk. I've made other videos about sewing with other different types of tools, but never a video about this. And I thought that this was the right time to add this to the list. So number one, we're just going to call it out. You need a sewing machine. So I would say definitely look at domestic sewing machines. Now there are a plethora of different sewing machine brands. You have Janome. I am a proud Janome owner and Janome maker, but I have owned other different types of machines in the past, and I've actually sewn on other different types of machines in the past. So you need something that's going to not only match the projects that you prefer to work on, but you also need something that is going to match your skill level. As a beginner, you're probably going to be inundated with a lot of different sewing machines. There's manual, there's computerized, there's ones that cost $1,000, there's ones that cost $100. And honestly, picking a sewing machine is 1000% a personal choice. I know that sounds super cliche, but it is so true. Personally speaking, me personally, my first machine was a Brother limited edition Project Runway machine. Now granted, I also learned how to sew in high school, and the machines that I learned to sew on in high school were Singers, Janomes, and Brothers. We had like a different array of them in the classroom, and it was kind of like first come first served, you sit wherever and whatnot. So I've worked on machines that have the top load bobbins, the front load bobbins. Working at David's Bridal, I work on an industrial machine, which was also a whole other learning curve. But I say all that to say that my first sewing machine that I bought for myself was a Project Runway Brother sewing machine. I don't think they have that machine anymore. And in my research, I found, I'm looking at my notes, y'all, that they have something comparable called the CS 5055. It's very similar to the machine that I still own, but it's kind of on that same level. And it actually costs about the same as what I paid for 12, 13 years ago when I bought that machine. There's also the sewing machine that I feel like is like the It Girl sewing machine. And it's the Singer Heavy Duty, the gray one. And I've sewn on that one because my mother-in-law has that machine, and I needed to sew something at her house one day. So I actually, she lent me her machine, and I wasn't a fan, but that doesn't mean that you may not become a fan. There's a reason why millions of people have bought it. There's a reason why it is absolutely so popular. But for me personally, I wasn't a fan. There's also the alternative to not necessarily buying like a fresh out the box sewing machine. You can probably find a gently used thrifted machine, or possibly one at an estate sale. I have heard, like, throughout the years, this is throughout the years, y'all, like if you can find an old Kenmore machine, you're good, because apparently Kenmore makes machines that are like built to last past the apocalypse. I don't know. But I hear a lot of great things about Kenmore, especially if you can find an older one. So that's a certain avenue. If your budget is a little bit bigger, like say you still want a beginner machine, but maybe you have a bigger budget to work with, definitely look at Janome and Burnett. Janome has sewing machines that are priced at all levels, y'all, like anywhere from like $100 I've seen all the way up to $6,000 and $10,000, and possibly even more than that. But if you're looking for something that's like middle of the road and automated, Janome has really great reliable machines. They're really known for their reliability. Burnett is like the little sister to Bernina. I've avoided that conversation for a really long time. I don't like to talk about sewing machine recommendations because it is such a personal choice. So please, if you take nothing from my lecture about sewing machines, understand that it is a very personal choice, and a lot of times it comes down to budget, what the machine can do, what you want the machine to be able to do, and what you will be most likely sewing on that machine. So you need an iron. Duh, right? So my current iron is the Mimi G Oliso limited edition, special edition iron. I love this iron. This is actually my first Oliso iron. I love that it has like feet for when I'm not working on it, and so it'll raise up, and so it won't burn the fabric or burn my iron stand when I walk away. It's a really good iron. It's also extremely heavy. So yeah, I'm gonna put this down. But this was not my first iron at all. This was like, I steadily came into that iron. My first iron, I'm trying to think, you guys, it was a Black & Decker old school iron. Like if you touched it along like one of the plate parts, oh my God, like your hand was burned for weeks. But I say all that to say, while it is a very bare bones, super basic Black & Decker iron, it did its job. And then after I don't even know what happened to the Black & Decker iron, but somehow I landed on a Rowenta. And I shouldn't say somehow. The somehow was that I saw that my husband, he was my boyfriend at the time, owned a Rowenta, and I said, I'll trade you. And that's how I ended up with my Rowenta. And years later, basically when we moved into this house, I dropped my Rowenta on the floor and she was never the same. And then I got my Oliso. Black & Decker, Rowenta, Oliso, 3 different types of irons. I would say that, like, depending again on your budget and what you want to go with, take a look at those 3. I don't really have bad things to say about any 3 of them. It really just comes down to your budget. I loved my Rowenta more than the Black & Decker, and I love my Oliso more than I love the Rowenta. So it's kind of like with every level up, your tools just get better and better. You see how that happens? All right, so number 3, you need paper scissors and fabric scissors. Yes, you do. So paper scissors are for cutting paper, and your fabric scissors are for cutting your fabric. The reason why you don't want to mix the 2 is because if you use your fabric scissors to cut your paper, it will actually dull the blade, and it will become increasingly challenging to cut your fabric. And you don't want that to happen. And a case in point in like seeing that in real time is like if you go to Joann's or Hobby Lobby or even the Walmart cutting counter, you may see someone trying to cut with regular scissors and that fabric is not cutting. And that's the type of challenge that you could run into if you mix these up. If you can tell, like my paper scissors are very basic. My fabric scissors are a little more sophisticated, and I have several pair, but that comes later. That comes down the line with evolution and just growing your sewing space and growing your skill level. But if you have a Fiskars, or even, and these are Fiskars actually, Fiskars. If you have Fiskars, if you have Gingers, or I think that's how you say it. I have a Ginger pair of scissors. If you have LDH scissors, they are going to be heavy. I'll be very real with you. They're heavy, but they work and they'll last if you take care of them. You may want to find someone who can sharpen these for you. A lot of times at like a sewing machine dealer or perhaps like a quilting store, they may have the tools to get these sharpened for you. So the maintenance for these is just to get them sharpened every now and again to keep the blades from getting dull. But if you also, like, the ongoing maintenance in your house would be to just not mix the scissors up. But I will say that if you are consistent with using your fabric scissors for fabric, your edges will always be sharp and beautiful. All right, pins and a pin cushion. So this is a magnetic one. You can get the magnetic ones or the tomato ones, or you can get a little dish bowl and have them in there, whatever suits you. But pins obviously are to help you keep your fabric together as you are sewing it. You never want to sew over your pins. It may happen, but you don't want that to happen deliberately. But the pin cushion is nice because it's a place to put your pins. Honestly, the magnetic ones are my favorite because if you drop your pins on the floor, you just pick it right on up and you can avoid any sort of injuries or just getting stuck with a pin. That's never fun. If you get the tomato one, there's actually, okay, my tomato cushion, you guys, don't judge me. In the little tomato cushion, you have, it's like a little sandbag. I believe it's sand, where you can actually sharpen your pins. And it is effective. I've actually used this before and it is actually very effective. And your sewing pins can get dull over time. But if you are, again, it's to help keep pieces together. It's actually to help lay pattern pieces on top of your fabric when you're cutting. I most specifically, like, I use pattern weights a lot more for when I'm cutting, but if I'm cutting something on the bias, I'm going to use my pins because I want it to be extremely accurate. And a lot of times if you're cutting something on the bias, you're more than likely using a charmeuse or a poly satin, and that's, you know, very swimmy fabric. It likes to move around a lot. So for precision like that, I love my pins. Also, when you are pinning things together, you want to make sure that you are pinning them, I think it's perpendicular to the fabric. So you want to make sure that you are pinning this perpendicular to the fabric and to how the stitch line is going to go. And if you don't know, now you know. If you pin it perpendicular, it actually helps to keep your line straight when you're sewing. All right, next thing you're going to need is measuring tape. So with your measuring tape, obviously it's for measuring your body and just pretty much making sure that you have an accurate measurement for when you are making your garments and when you're about to cut out your pattern. There is, I wouldn't even call it a myth. I have heard that measuring tapes tend to stretch over time. I've not seen it in my own measuring tapes, but I wouldn't put it past them. And when you first start sewing, you're just going to need one measuring tape. And right now I'm looking across, you know, at my wall and I have like 10 of them, but that's because they're collected over time. A lot of times if you get a mystery box or if someone sends you something, they'll gift you a measuring tape. So I have plenty of them. And a lot of times, you know, I'll leave them. There's one at the sewing table. There's one at the ironing board. There's one at my cutting table. So you'll start to collect these over time and you may have to switch them out. You may have favorites and whatnot, but in the beginning, you just need one. Okay, you guys, your seam gauge. So I cannot live without this thing. And once you know how to use it, you're going to be like, where's my seam gauge? So this little guy, if you are trying to measure an edge or you need to, you know, press something to a certain inch or mark or something like that, this is extremely helpful. I even have this for when I want to make sure that my needle placement on my machine is correct. And I know there's measurements and rulers all over the sewing machine and stuff like that, but sometimes I'm like, my OCD, like, I'm just like, I just need to double check with my seam gauge. Like that's kind of how insane I am about using this tool. But your hems will be better. Your edges will be better. Your creases will be better if you have a seam gauge. All right, next up, you need a cutting mat. And not just any cutting mat. Like, don't get one of those tiny ones. Like, no, you need a big girl cutting mat. You need something that's like 24 inches this way or 36 inches this way by 36 or 60 inches. You need a cutting mat. And the reason why you need one is because, one, let me be clear, it needs to be a self-healing cutting mat. So that means that, like, if you run your blade across the mat, it'll heal. You won't have any like cuts or permanent divots in it, which is extremely helpful for if you are constantly cutting fabric on your on your mat. But it helps to layer fabric evenly. It helps with like grain line measurements and all sorts of things. So you need a cutting mat. The other reason why you need a cutting mat is that if you are cutting on something that's not truly a craft table, like say you're using your island in your kitchen, or say you're using a banquet table, or just maybe even your dining table, who wants cutting streaks and skid marks across, stuff that you paid for? Even like a nice scissor can scratch up the nicest table. So you want to make sure that you're protecting your belongings. You want to make sure that you are on an even surface. If you have a wooden table that has, artificial or real blemishes on it, like how like the really pretty butcher style ones are, you definitely don't want those to like show up in like a cut. Believe me, if you cut on something that's uneven, it's going to show up in your fabric one way or the other. So protect your belongings, protect the integrity of your fabric in your garment, and invest in a really good cutting mat. And a lot of times you can probably get one on sale with like a Joann's 40% off coupon, or you can even get them at Walmart and put like two together, and you can kind of make it a little bit longer. There's ways around it, but get you a big girl cutting mat. So these two go hand in hand: good thread and a pack of needles. Okay, so remember my sewing class where I was a C student? I didn't know anything about changing needles. It wasn't until I got my own sewing machine, plus another like 5 years later, that I realized, oh, you need to change out your sewing machine needles. And I didn't even know that there was like anything more than like the universal needle, or the needles that actually come with your machine sometimes. So, Schmetz, they make really good sewing needles. Singer makes their own version of sewing needles. And like I said earlier, you may get a handful of sewing needles that actually come with your sewing machine. So if you go in your manual, you'll find out how to switch those out. But typically if you're top stitching, or if you're using denim, or if you're working with knits, you'll need to change out your sewing needle. Even if you're working with a poly satin, it's wise to change out your sewing needle. I usually use a Microtex, but we're getting into like advanced stuff. But for now, just buy a universal pack of needles. Good thread. Not all thread will agree with your sewing machine. Let that sink in. So I had a mishap with Coats & Clark, and I realized that me and Gutermann get along much better than Coats & Clark. And I've been a Gutermann girly ever since. Now, Gutermann is a little expensive, but if you can catch it on sale, usually Joann's will have a buy 3 or buy 2 get 3 free type of sale. If you invest in a handful of white ones, a handful of black ones, maybe an oatmeal color, and then maybe a red if you're working with red fabric, or whatever fabric you're working with, get some matching thread. But definitely invest in the black and white thread first. There's a shameless plug coming. Pattern weights. So like I said, I have been an advocate of working with pattern weights. I'm so much of an advocate that I actually have my own pattern weight shop on Etsy, where you can get pattern weights for your projects. I sell them in large formats, or large size formats. So this is for if you're working with heaps and yards of fabric, or if you're working with denim or anything like that. It's for most fabrics. But I say all that to say that my pattern weights are not the only pattern weights you can use. You can use bean bags. You can use washers. I used washers for a very long time before I started my own pattern weight business. Now, because I have so many samples of my own pattern weights, or just pattern weights that didn't cure the right way, I use those a lot more. And you see that a lot in my videos. But I really enjoy using pattern weights over pinning, just because it goes by quicker versus having to pin every little piece down and then pick all those pins back up once you are done cutting the fabric. To me, it's easy to just kind of go along the line, put these down, and I haven't, had issues with my fabric being shifted or anything like that. Pattern weights are designed to do exactly what it sounds like. Weight. It's weight on your pattern. Okay, we're getting ready to talk about one of my favorite sewing tools. You guys are going to think I'm silly, but I love marking tools. I can't get enough of them. So if you're new to sewing, you need marking tools to mark all of those symbols from your pattern piece to your fabric. So you can have chalk, which is great for denim, knits even. I love to use this on darker fabric. And then they also make chalks in different colors and whatnot, but this is like a tailor's chalk. And I just love it. And not all chalk is like the same. So you got to make sure you get tailor's chalk. There's also wax. Wax kind of works like a soap in a way. It's not my favorite. To me, I also find that it's harder to get off the fabric. With chalk, if you get tailor's chalk, you can do your markings, and sometimes you can even just dust it off. If it's a little harder to get off, just take a piece of nylon, rub it on the chalk, and it'll come right out. But I love me some chalk for, like I said, denim, ponte knits, anything like that where it's a bulkier fabric, even like a suiting, this is really good for. I love my soluble pens, but you have to be careful with these. People say that these don't come out. I feel like these wash off or these disappear way too quickly. So I usually like to make these markings after I have pressed my fabric, because of the simple fact that it tends to dissolve as soon as the iron hits it. Then you have, this is a soluble marker. The soluble marker, I feel like, is hit and miss. I have bought soluble markers that just won't work out the pack. I have soluble markers that will never go away. They will never wash away in the fabric, no matter how many times you've tried. And sometimes it can be a gamble. So this is probably the one that I use the least. And then the tailor's chalk and the soluble pens, which by the way, you can get at Waywack or Wawack. These are probably my top two favorite marking tools. Next up, you need a seam ripper. And this is, yes, it's definitely on the list for beginners, but this does not leave my sewing machine side. Even the most skilled sewer, middle of the road sewer, any type of sewer, you need this by your side. And one thing that you may not know is that seam rippers can actually get dull. They can. And the way that you know that your seam ripper is dull is if it's actually really challenging to rip the seam, and you end up either ripping the fabric that you didn't want to rip, or it just doesn't actually rip through it. So when you buy your seam rippers, definitely buy like a pack. If you can, buy like a pack of 4, or just buy as many as you can in a single purchase, because they will dull over time. And you want to make sure that your seam ripper is sharp. That way, if you do make a mistake, you can unpick those seams as quickly as possible and just move on. This is without a doubt one of my favorite tools ever. This is a see-through ruler, and I love her so much. She's been through a lot. As you can see, I've like ran over her a couple of times, but she's fine. She's still hanging in there. But I love this ruler for if you are a short person like me, and if you need to make adjustments, or if you just need to see like where the hem is going or anything. And I know that doesn't sound like something that a beginner would need, but you're gonna need this more than you know. So again, definitely think about getting one of these. They're not that much. It might be like less than $5, and they've got like a little hook so you can or they've got a little hole so you can put a hook on there. But literally it's a 2-inch ruler, and you can tell the 1/2-inch markings that are indicated across. It's usually about 17 inches up and down, but 2 inches short ways. And this is my baby. This is, I think, the first one, my first and only one. I haven't replaced it yet because I love it. Extra bobbins. So yes, your sewing machine may come with like 4 or 5 bobbins, but girl, you're gonna need more than that. So I will say you can go on Amazon, type in the style number of your specific sewing machine, and you can find the bobbin that works in the bobbin case. If you are someone where you get the bug of sewing and you're just like, I want to make everything, you're going to need more than the standard amount of bobbins that you get in your sewing machine. Mark my words. Storage or tackle box. Yes. So if you are someone, again, like I said, having a designated sewing space is a luxury and a privilege. So if you're someone where you are working in your dining space or your kitchen or just someplace where you need to pack up your things once you're done with your project, you need a storage or a tackle box. Now this one is teeny tiny and I have several around this room, but you need something to hold all of these tools in, or just like little knickknacks. Sometimes even like your sewing feet. I have several sewing feet in here. Different tools that go with my sewing machine are in here as well. But you're going to need a storage solution, and you're going to find that out very quickly. So a little storage box like this. You can even get like the 3-drawer Sterilites. I've owned several in my sewing lifetime. I still own several. It's just inevitable. And then Hobby Lobby and Joann's will usually have a section for storage solutions. And they'll usually be on sale and whatnot. And I would look for one that's like stackable, has layers, has like different openings and things like that. I actually have one of those haberdashery ones, and it is so cute and whatnot. I don't use it as often as I used to, but when I was in my one bedroom apartment and I needed to pack things up very quickly if I had guests coming over, that was kind of like my catch-all. So there's different solutions, and it's going to be relative to the space that you work in and how many tools that you have, but you definitely need something to keep things in place and to keep them tidy. So the last tool on my list, and again, this is subjective to the space that you are working in, but it's something that I highly recommend. Get you a pegboard. Mine is from IKEA, and I have added and subtracted little fixtures on it, but I love it so much. Like, I can't picture my space without it. So I highly recommend that you look into getting something like that, or even like I've seen videos online of people like making like the super big Home Depot pegboards that are like massive. You can get those. Or even if you get a cork board and you decide that you want to pin your ideas on it, go for it. All right, you guys, I want to thank you so much for watching this video. Now, if you like this video, don't forget to hit that like and subscribe button. And if you need me to just kind of expound on any of these tools a little bit more, definitely let me know in the comments. I'll see y'all next time. Bye.